Hi, and welcome to our newest episode of Experian Talks. And this week, Experian Talks dealing with county court judgments. And we're very honored to be joined by Lex Jones, who's the CEO of the Registry Trust. And she's going to walk us through lots of the information that we all need to know about what happens when you get a county court judgment, what Registry Trust does, what Trust Online does, and I'll throw in some bits of information about how a county court judgment or a court judgment can affect your credit score as well, and some of the ways you can dispute that through a credit reference agency like Experian. So, Lex, thank you so much for joining. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about you and Registry Trust and Trust Online, of course?
Hi, John. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be joining the Experian Talks event today and to talk about county court judgments. So, as you said, I'm the CEO of Registry Trust. Registry Trust are a small independent non-profit organisation, and we run the public register of judgments, orders and fines. Now, a lot of people might not have heard of that, but actually the information we have is hugely important across the UK and gets used in all manner of different decisions that are taken on a daily basis. We've been in operation since 1985, and we maintain registers across all the UK jurisdictions, and not just England and Wales. Our mission is, of course, to provide public data for the public good. So we provide a trusted and crucially impartial source of credit information to anyone who needs it, and that happens via our customer-facing website, which is Trust Online. Our customers can be individuals like you and I, John, or they can be businesses who use the information to create credit scores, to decide who to lend to, etc. And the data doesn't just get used by finance companies. It also gets used by insurance companies, insolvency practitioners, anti-fraud agencies, and people involved in policymaking or academic research. So a pretty wide scope there. We publish regular thought pieces and blogs, and you'll see those on the Registry Trust website. And those can be on anything from all the effects of lockdown on judgment levels, all the way through to regional and industry-specific analysis. On that same website, we also maintain a financial stress tracker. It's available for anyone to look at, anyone to use, and it combines external data with CCJ, county court judgment information, to understand markers of financial stress in different regions across the UK. And finally, of course, we campaign to raise awareness of county court judgments, including our campaign for Get Satisfaction, which I suspect we'll talk about in a bit, which is all around the importance of getting a judgment marked as satisfied once that judgment has been paid. This is vital for the health of people's credit record and credit history. So we're very, very passionate about making sure that happens.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm glad you talked about getting court judgments satisfied and how we'll go about that, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go through the questions. So I think a great place to kick off is just, if you could, just walking us through the steps someone will take if they get a county court judgment. And I guess, by the way, this happens a lot from a credit reference agency perspective, which is sometimes people just don't know they've got a court judgment until they apply for credit, and they haven't checked their credit report beforehand, and then that's when it throws something up, and then they kind of discover, oops, I've got this county court judgment. It might have been from an old address or something. But can you walk us through what to do when you discover the county court judgment, whether that's an old one or just come through the post?
Yeah, so I think if you get one through the post, you get letters and correspondence through from the court service, and they'll tell you who to contact, how to make payment, etc., etc., and they'll give you all the reference numbers and all of the details that you need. That said, if you find any of that information confusing or difficult to understand, I think debt advice industry colleagues would thank me for pointing out you should probably go and speak to a debt advisor who'll be able to talk you through the process in a bit more detail. And you can, of course, look on our website in our help topics, because there's all manner of helpful information there, including just breaking down some of the language used and explaining what some of those words and terms actually mean. What you should do, though, if you've got the letter in front of you, it will tell you who to make payment to and when you need to do so. If you're not able to make payment at that point in time, it's still important that you get back in touch with the courts and perhaps see if you can work out some sort of payment plan, so you can start to pay that debt back when you need to. If, on the other hand, it's something you find out as a result of perhaps being declined credit, step one for me would always be to go on to Trust Online and do the search and find out, what is this judgment, when was it, how much was it for, etc., and just see if that triggers any recollections for you. You'll get the reference numbers that you need, and then you can contact the court service and ask how you need to make payment, if you need to make payment. Alternatively, if you don't believe it is appropriate or right, you don't think that that judgment should be against you, then you can speak to the court about the next steps to make sure that that judgment is removed from your record. If they agree to do so, and they don't have to, that's the court's prerogative, but if they agree to do so, they will then send that updated information through to Registry Trust, and Registry Trust will then in turn update credit reference agencies.
Okay, that's interesting. Lots of stuff in there. And actually the first point, the first thing actually is you mentioned specifically about debt advice. So I guess, someone who might find themselves in a scenario where county court judgment is perhaps the result of problem debt, or being in a difficult financial situation, we'll put some names below, but pay plan, national debt line, step change, and citizens advice, probably all good places to go if you do find yourself in that scenario as well. And okay, so you mentioned Lex about well, actually something that you mentioned was around the payment plan and going to the court. So I just thought it might be good to understand that bit as well. But what happens when you pay a CCJ? So you get it through, and then do you pay it to the court, or do you pay it to the original lender, or this payment plan? If you wouldn't mind kind of saying what happens there. And I guess actually we might talk about it, but from a credit report point of view, if you pay your county court judgment in those first 30 days or first 1 month, then it will be set aside, which means it won't show on your credit report, which is the ideal scenario for anyone if they do get a county court judgment, because of course they don't want it to show. But maybe you can just expand a little bit on, okay, what happens when you do make that payment? How do you go through that process? And the bit about the payment plan. And of course, I'm guessing, and you can clarify, but if you're in a payment plan, I'm guessing that doesn't change the rules around set aside, and you'll still have that showing on your credit report. I'm throwing lots of questions at you. So.
You are, and I'm not going to remember all of them, so you might need to probably again.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
In terms of though how to make the payment, again, you'll get that detail either in the letter you're sent from the court, or when you speak to them, they will tell you how and who to pay. In some instances, it will be them. In other instances, it may be the debt management firm that has taken out the judgment, or it could be in fact the original creditor that you obtained credit from in the first place. So there's a number of different options there, but by and large, you'll obtain that information through the court service, and you can then just make that payment and start to move on. I'm glad you've mentioned set-asides and satisfactions though, because the two things are quite different and quite separate. As you said, John, in an ideal world, you'll manage to get a set-aside. And what that means is if you fully paid that judgment within a calendar month of the date of the original judgment, it comes off your credit file, comes off the judgment register of judgments, and you're done. No one needs to know about it, and life can move on, and that's fine. However, if you're only able to make that payment in full after a calendar month has ended from the date of the original judgment, then at that point, that judgment, when paid in full, gets marked as satisfied. And there's a really big cautionary note here. And again, this comes onto our campaign for Get Satisfaction. And most people are not aware that once you've made that full payment for the judgment, you still need to let the court service know that you've made that full and final payment for the judgment. If you don't do that, then the courts will not necessarily know to update their records that the judgment has been satisfied. They in turn will not tell us, and we in turn will then not be able to tell credit reference agencies and to update Trust Online, etc. So a horrific scenario in that the individual in this instance has made that payment. They've done the right thing there, and then they're not, no pun intended, they're not going to get their credit for it. And that just feels right. I know. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I use that one all the time.
I make it all the time. It's awful. But so that's why we're so passionate about this, and trying to make sure it just becomes part of the process and part of the advice that is given out to anyone as well, that they must make sure they take that extra step as well to get a judgment satisfied.
Okay, super. So quick question then, getting a judgment satisfied or set aside, would you need to go through the same process of updating the courts for both of those scenarios, that you have made the payment in either of those?
Yes, always best to.
Okay.
And because I am a deeply cautious person myself, I would always suggest as well that you give it a few days and then you go on to Trust Online and you do a search just to make sure that information has come through to us and been updated. Because, you know, once it's hit us and been updated, it then goes straight through to the credit reference agencies every single day, same day. So, you know, they will get that information immediately as well.
Great. And of course, this is where I'll jump in and talk about, I guess, very, very quickly, the fact that you do update that information with the credit reference agencies, and you'll update with all 3 credit reference agencies, because obviously we're from Experian and there's Equifax and TransUnion as well, and you update with all 3 of us. And importantly, if you don't get that update through, you know, registry trust to the credit reference agency, then what's left on your credit report will have a severe impact on your credit score and your ability to borrow credit, which means not only could you struggle to get credit, but the credit you do get will be usually quite expensive because the interest rate will be higher, and the limits and the amounts that lenders are prepared to lend will be a bit lower as well. So that's why it's, you know, just like you said, like, so important that you make sure that you get that cleared up, and, you know, you chase up your payments if it's been made and get things updated as it should be. So
it absolutely
so
is,
great.
John. And actually, if I can pick up on that, over and above the financial angle, there's other ways in which having a judgment, particularly an unsatisfied judgment, can impact your, you know, your ability to kind of live the life in the way that you would want. It can also mean it's difficult to maintain employment, to move into rented accommodation, or even in some instances to obtain insurance. So you're quite correct to hone in on the financial implications, but it's broader than that as well.
Yes, absolutely. I should be remiss for probably not mentioning those things, but yeah, of course. Of course, I mean, not to, I guess, put anyone at worry, because if you do have it, like we said at the beginning, there's lots of things that you can do if you have a court judgment, including the free debt advice providers we talked about before. But yes, it does have, I guess, that impact even on rental, particularly if you're applying for jobs in financial services, for example. A court judgment will have some impact, and it just depends on, you know, who you're applying for a job through and their views on it, and of course honesty. So so let's jump into the next one, which is I am just using me here, have just found out I've got an old county court judgment, and, you know, what do I do at that point? Because it may be something that I was never aware of, or, you know, for no recollection of being notified or what the debt was. What would I do in that kind of scenario? Do I come to you, or come to the court, or come to a credit reference agency? Well, I could probably answer that one, but yeah, if you could tell us what you
I think you probably take the last point there, can't you? In terms of, you know, worst comes to the worst, you've done this, you know, you've applied for something perhaps, and you suddenly found out that you've got this historic judgment against you and you're not sure what it is or what to do. I would always encourage anyone to phone through to Registry Trust. We will always try and help to the best of our ability. Ultimately, our power to do anything with those judgments for you is limited, because we are reliant on court instruction to do so, because of course a judgment does come from the courts in the first place. But if we can help you find any detail that you would need, and then that you can take that forward with the court service to say, actually, I don't think it was appropriate that I got this judgment passed against me because of, and, you know, whatever circumstances it is that you need to explain at that time. At that point, the decision is very much within the hands of the court, as you would expect, but they will then decide whether or not they want to have that judgment struck off from the record altogether, which, you know, they can do, they have done in the past, or whether, you know, something else needs to happen as a result of that. You know, genuinely, if you think it's not right that judgment is there, you should absolutely take steps.
Okay, super. So I'm kind of thinking about scenarios where, or maybe they're kind of tales or rumors about what happens when you find yourself in this scenario, but you moved address, and for whatever reason you were notified about a court judgment at another previous address, and you had never known about it. And at that point, you know, when you're querying this with the court, for example, is it a case of actually they could reissue the judgment as if it was a new judgment and they were notifying you for the first time, and you have that window of opportunity to pay the debt and get it set aside again. Have you ever heard of such a thing?
I have not, and I confess, John, I suspect that might be wishful thinking. Again,
Okay.
obviously I don't speak on behalf of the courts. I would think it quite unusual, though, for them to say, "Oh, you moved house, it's fine, we'll just reset it all again." I suspect if they were, if they found the arguments compelling from you in that instance, I think they're more likely to just have the original judgment removed from the register and to say, right, go.
Okay.
I don't think you would just get a sort of fast forward and pause button. I'm not sure that would be quite how that would work.
Yeah, maybe just being a bit too hopeful.
I mean, there's always lots of rumours out there, and you working for a credit reference agency as well, you must be fully aware of some of the myths that you must have to work quite hard to dispel. So,
of course, which actually might bring me on to the next one, which is just talking about a little bit about how it can affect your credit rating. Because when you have a court judgment, I think probably important to make people aware that from the start date of that judgment, it'll be on the credit report for 6 years, and it will be removed from the credit report, happens automatically at 6 years, irrelevant of the status of the court judgment. So whether it's satisfied or not, it gets removed. And then, for the duration that it's on there, although it will have a bit less of an impact as it ages, because as things get older on your credit report, they're not quite as serious as, that first year or 2 years or 3 years. But it will have an impact on your score and your ability to borrow credit, as we said. So what it will do is just generally make things a little bit tougher. So, I mean, Lex, I know we talked about earlier the other bits around renting a property, getting a job, and so on, and other services. But I suppose for the conversation about accessing credit, if you want to get credit at the best rates, if you want to get credit which is the right amount of credit that you want to get, whether it's a credit card limit or a loan, for example, that's where you might start to struggle. So it's important to make sure that if you can, you pay that court judgment up front in that first calendar month, so it gets set aside from your credit report. If you can't and it's on there, the thing that you can do, and it doesn't remove it and it doesn't change the information, is adding what's called a notice of correction to your credit report. And it's a short note, and it will explain the circumstances around why it's there. Now, just to clarify, really, you should add this note if it's for a genuine reason. So redundancy or illness or bereavement or something that caused this small problem or this problem, to happen, and then show on your credit report. And all it does is when you apply for credit, it'll let the lender look at it, review that note, and just see if they can factor it into their lending decision. So, if it's, by the way, a case of you just forgot to pay something, I probably wouldn't write that in a note on your credit report. But just genuine things, put it on there, and it gives you the chance to explain the circumstances. So that I kind of hopefully, Lex, just gives people a bit of an idea of the impact it can have. And it's not forever, which I guess is the positive to take away from that. You've got 6 years that it's on there, so it's not the end of the world if it does happen, but it does mean things are a little bit tricky for the time that it is on your credit report.
Yes, I would absolutely agree. And actually, picking up on your point there around the notice of correction, you can also ask for a notice of disassociation as well. And again, I know this will be something all about, John, but effectively a similar thing, in that if your credit history is financially linked for one reason or another with another party, and they obtain a judgment, your credit score can then end up being impacted. So if you find out that perhaps a partner or someone else that you've been financially linked with in the past has had a judgment, you can ask for a disassociation to be done by credit reference agencies. And again, you will then find that there is no impact on you personally as a result of that other person's judgment.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually, it's what's called a financial disassociation. And the bit that, that nobody will like me saying is that you have to do it with all 3 credit reference agencies separately. So you can't just do it with one. However, it's not too difficult. There's an online form. You can do it with most places, but as long as there's nothing open together, so you don't have open current accounts or an open loan for a joint loan, for example, then you can disassociate yourself from someone else. So funnily enough, it doesn't actually impact, their credit score or your credit score. What is impacted is if you're financially associated to someone who has a judgment on their credit report. When you apply for credit, the lender can check that person's credit history as well. And if they've got it on there, that means it could impact the decision. So, it could be that it leads to credit refusal. Probably won't, but it may mean that the interest rate again could be a bit higher, the limit could be a bit lower, and you might not get the credit that you think you should get, or perhaps you should be getting if you weren't associated. So that's why it's really important to check it and get it disassociated if you can. So wonderful, Lex. Thank you for prompting me there. So let's talk a little bit about checking for CCJs, because of course this might give us a chance to kind of clarify what Trust Online is. I mean, obviously from a credit reference agency, and we've talked about the three main credit reference agencies. Now you share your information from Registry Trust with all three. So actually, if you check your credit report with any of those, then with any of the credit reference agencies, you'll see your court judgment on there. But if you want to explain a little bit about what Trust Online is, or what people can use that service for, that might help kind of figure out what people can do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Trust Online is our consumer-facing website in the main. It's got a huge number of different help topics on there, but the main reason people visit Trust Online is to conduct a CCJ search. And you might want to check if you're about to apply for credit, or you might want to check if you've actually just been refused credit. Conversely, people will often use it at a smaller commercial scale. So we often find that we get employment agencies or HR managers choosing to use it because it's part of their employee background checks, particularly, John, as we've discussed already, anyone entering into a kind of regulated field, very, very important that background checks are done and are thorough. Landlords also use the register as part of their pre-tenancy checks that they'll do before they take in any new tenants. And finally, from a consumer point of view, if you're about to enter into any kind of financial agreement with someone, you might also want to check the register for their details. And that might be either someone that you're going to start renting with yourself, but it could be if you're about to employ someone to come and do plastering, or redo your roof, or whatever it might be. It's going to take an appreciable sum of money for you to pay for. You probably do want to do a little bit of background check on that person there, and you can use Trust Online to do so.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but is it as simple as I could go on to Trust Online and just do a quick check of someone I might be living with, or someone like you said, someone who might be doing work at my house or so on, and just do a check like that? Do you need any kind of permissions, or are you allowed to kind of go on there and just do that search because it's public record information?
No, exactly, John. It's already a matter of public records. So if they don't have any public records, then they will simply not appear on the register at all, and your search will show kind of like a nil return. Effectively, there's nothing to see here, etc. You will need some detail, but obviously, if you're about to do business with someone, or whatever agreement it is you have with that person, you're likely to have that detail already. So quite straightforward to do. And of course, the beautiful thing about using Trust Online is that it won't leave any kind of trace on the person's credit file either. So you don't have to worry about causing any harm to someone's credit record through them having lots of different searches appear in a short space of time.
You just made me realize as well, as we talked about that of course, I guess people don't really disclose that they've got county court judgments publicly. So I guess that's why sometimes it gets announced that people have court judgments when someone does a search to see if they do have it. Of course, we hear sometimes of high profile people who have county court judgments in their name.
Yeah, well, justice is blind, so anyone can obtain a county court judgment. The thing that I think I'm particularly pleased with, though, when it comes to judgments coming through, is how rapidly we're able to act as an organisation, in tandem with the courts and with credit reference agencies, to make sure the flow of information goes from source to source, and it's all as current as it should be.
Yes, I agree with that totally, and I think actually the process between particularly a credit reference agency, so Experian and Registry Trust, particularly for things like disputes and so on, works particularly well, and with your updates as well is great. So I think things work really well when they work well, and hopefully we've kind of, I say we because it's you who have walked people through how to start from the beginning at the courts and so on, and kind of take them through that journey of getting things updated and satisfied, of course, and set aside if they can.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, I think that wraps up just about everything we wanted to talk about. So Lex, thanks for joining us. I think it's been great actually to hear about, you know, what Registry Trust does, what you can do on Trust Online, which is really important as well, and the bit about, you know, walking us through the journey of getting a judgment satisfied, what to do if you find out you've got a judgment and so on is really great. And hopefully it sets some people on the right track of what to do if that happens. And just like you said, you know, if you find yourself in a scenario where you've got a county court judgment or court judgment and you're struggling financially, we'll list in the description all of the debt advice charities, free debt advice charities and organizations that you can speak to who can kind of help you through the process as well, and walk you through as well some of the disputes and get things satisfied and set aside.
Absolutely.
But Lex, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's been great to speak to you.
Oh, my pleasure, John. I hope